Well, we have a bit less than 1 hour of this roundtable discussion. We have been discussing about social and scientific rationality. Well, I believe this discussion should be deepened further. That's my personal view. Because when we talk about the return of evacuees or the lawsuits that are taking place, we need to think about how to treat this matter of social and scientific rationality. And in that sense, this is very much not only a conceptual, but a concrete matter that is in front of us. We have limited time, so we would like to move, however, to the third point. The third point I suggested was the discussion about responsibility. We often talk about Okinawa and Fukushima side by side, in the sense that they are the victims of the national governmental policy. In that sense, there are similarities. Okinawa was forced to have the US base. Fukushima, however, as a fact, have invited the nuclear power plant. And that should not be ignored. Economic, in a way, profit-seeking action has selected the nuclear power in Fukushima. But despite that, there are some commonality in terms of the history of these regions. And in that sense, well, there is certain responsibility on all parties, responsibility of the citizens of Japan. Well, we need to understand the matters as the parties concerned, the stakeholders and citizens need to accept the nuclear power accident and think about the future in a more proactive manner. Who actually caused these damages? Well, it seems to be quite clear. Citizens, residents clearly are victims without any doubt. So if we clarify the inflictor, the offender, a perpetrator, well, that is something that is different, important. However, there is no such natural person called TEPCO. There is no natural person called the Japanese government. So who are the actual perpetrators? Well, when you look at the shareholders of TEPCO, do you know how many shareholders hold the shares of TEPCO? There are 790,000 shareholders, including natural persons and corporations and other organizations. I'm one of them. The responsibility of the shareholders, that definitely exists. And also, financial institutions and banks that are lending money to TEPCO are responsible because there are about 6 trillion yen of corporate bond that has been issued. So in that sense, there are claims of taking the responsibility from such financial perspective as well. Now, the owners of the corporate bonds, acquirers of the corporate bonds, can we actually really pursue legal responsibility? Well, it's not such an easy matter from legal perspective. And finally, regarding the compensation and who should eventually shoulder the burden of the compensation, well, government now has budget of 9 trillion yen that they have injected on supporting TEPCO. And if you look at the balance sheet of TEPCO, they are actually making profits. PL, if they look at the PL, they are actually profitable currently. So in that sense, the support, financial support of the government are not on the debt side. It is actually going towards the profit side. the support of the national government are considered to be the extraordinary profit. That is why they are actually making profit currently on PL basis. So that means that the national government support does not bear interest payment in the future. They do not have to return or pay back. That is the nature of this money. There is no guarantee of paying back. Well, can we actually reflect that and transfer that to the fees, the power fees? Well, it's quite doubtful, because as of next year in Japan, we will have a complete free liberalized retail market in terms of the electricity market. Any company, anyone can enter this free retail market of electricity. The competition will be fierce. And in that sense, TEPCO succeeding in increasing their fees so that they can cover about 10 trillion yen of fees that they would need to pay from compensation, that would be very difficult under this new competitive environment. And so that would eventually mean that this money would come from the government, which means that money would come from the taxpayers. It's easy to talk about the government's responsibility or the national responsibility, but when we look at the eventual bearer of such responsibility, we need to clearly see who they are. Are they taxpayers? Are they government? That perspective needs to be clarified as we discuss about this. And I don't think we are talking enough about this matter. That is why I want to suggest this as a topic for this part of this discussion. Well, of course, we cannot talk into details and depths into the management of TEPCO, but I want to talk more about who should bear the responsibility, how should we consider the compensation schemes. Thank you very much. And I'd like to add some words as well in terms of who should bear the responsibility, who is the perpetrator, who is responsible for the compensation. So let us look at the question of who, and let me add some words about that. Shimizu-san said that Fukushima, unlike Okushima, is responsible. Well, who is Fukushima? There are people who have been undertaking anti-nuclear activities. Are they responsible because did they invite the nuclear power there? Did they get benefits? Well, there are certain people who did benefit, who did invite nuclear power. Shall we distinguish these people? Because eventually, it's a matter of individuals. Earlier, we talked about the concept of human rights, and this is very much in relation when it comes to the issue of who is responsible in terms of individuals. We talk about these environmental lawsuits like Minamata disease. The perpetrators can always change places, but victims will always remain victims till the end of their lives. For example, road construction, people who are against road constructions, they are getting older. So they said to the government as such, they are getting older. They are getting older, but you will always remain young. So in that sense, when it comes to the matter of responsibility, there eventually matters that can be a question of individual eventually. And then there are other actors who are more conceptual actors like government, the perpetrators. So when we think about the question of who, in relation with the issue of responsibility and human rights, we really need to think about the actors, the other side that we are facing. So what kind of layers of the actors exist when we talk about ourselves, when we talk about the other side? In terms of the entity, we need to think about this. So now, yes, I see hands being raised. Regarding responsibility, I need to talk from the legal perspective. Earlier in my presentation, I talked about the difference between liability and responsibility. And I distinguished the two. But in Japanese, actually, the word is the same for both. But there are different levels of responsibility. We talk about CSR, for example. corporations have the responsibility within the community they operate, so they need to make donations to the community. For example, there was a lawsuit in Tokyo for the air pollution, and such responsibility was talked about when it comes to the automakers. They have CSR in terms of the air pollution that was caused in the area. So this responsibility is very much close to the legal responsibility, that is liability. But we need to be aware of different layers of responsibility or liability. When we talk about the responsibility of the government, well, I think that also exists in several layers. For example, the first responsibility is the fact that they promoted as national policy the nuclear power generation in Japan. That's one. And secondly, in terms of the prevention, the fact that they failed to take prevention in concrete manners in case of severe accident, in case of a major natural catastrophe that is over 10 meters high tsunami. So that is the lack of prevention, and that is very much directly linked to liability from legal perspective. Well, and the third perspective is the following, but very much difficult to talk about legal liability. The preemptive actions, in order to claim a responsibility or liability of someone not taking certain action, we need to first define the responsibility of taking certain actions. So that can be defined from a legal perspective. For example, if someone is drowning in the river, and if I didn't help them because I didn't want to get into the cold water, well, would I be liable from legal perspective for not helping? No, that is not the case, because I have no responsibility to go into the river and help that child. But if I push that child into the river, and if the child drowned, and if I didn't help, well, then I'll be liable from legal perspective, because there is a certain action that I have taken, and I have the responsibility of cleaning up after myself. So that is the same for the government. And in that sense, we can claim liability of the government in this perspective. Another perspective, well, government and the nation has the responsibility of protecting the health, the life, the happiness, the well-being of the citizens. That's why a nation exists. Why does government exist? Well, there are many different reasons, but human rights, life, and health and well-being of people should be protected by the government. So if a disaster happens, what does the government have to do? Well, that's a natural disaster, so no one's responsible. That has been the discussion up until now. But if there is a catastrophe, and in order to understand that in a societal and legal perspective, the government has to take certain actions, and this has been the discussions in Japan, especially since the Kobe earthquake. And in that sense, there are so many layers of complex issues of liability and responsibility which need to be detangled, untangled, and clarified when we talk about this. But majorly, I think the second liability of lack of preventive action, I think that should be the core. And the third issue would not be a direct legal liability, but there is a political and social responsibility of not helping the child in the river. So lender issue, Fukushima people's issues, there are various issues around the nuclear issue today. And in that sense, there is a multi-layer presence of different responsibilities and liabilities. We need to discuss in terms of what should actually, what action should be taken in terms of the different layers. Of course, we can say it's the responsibility of the Tokyo people who have been consuming the energy that has been generated from the Fukushima power plant. Well, we can talk about all these liabilities and responsibilities, but then we need to further the discussion as well. So in that sense, clarifying the liabilities and responsibility, and based on the responsibility, what action is necessary, and based on that, we need to clarify what should be the policies and countermeasures. Regarding the concept of responsibility, I would like to just add one point. Earlier, we talked about empowerment, and in the same stream, we talked about citizens' participation, and through citizens' participation, each and every individual should bear responsibility. That was the concept Well, it seems that is very much popular now today. And going back to philosophy, because I think philosophy here again is necessary, Joachim Tront, a US philosopher, is saying the following: the concept of responsibility, in order for that concept to exist, there need to be, as assumption, a relationship. The relationship is lacking today. And the independence of the individuals is very much, autonomy of individual is very much emphasized today. So within this backdrop, the responsibility, when there are issues and problems, well, responsibility there means that you have to bear the responsibility and outcomes of problems and issues. But, however, today, there is no longer this assumptions and preconditions of relationship, and this is a major issue, I believe.
At this moment, the criteria is determined by international agencies. And based on that standard defined by the international agency, why each individual has to assume the responsibility, this is what I cannot figure out. For example, my child is not chosen by the current standard. And therefore, if my child has to be responsible for the current situation, it's really troublesome with liberalism approach. As I mentioned, there's no more relationships between the original act and the consequences resulted from that previous act. And these relationships is deleted by liberalism.
I would nominate two organizations to have some responsibility. The first is the International Atomic Energy Agency, because they have the mandate to promote the safe use of atomic energy. And they were also responsible, and they failed in that responsibility, to deploy the Convention on Assistance in the event of a nuclear emergency, which had been set up after Chernobyl, to deal with nuclear emergencies on an international level rather than leave it to a single nation to deal with the problem. So I think there's a moral responsibility with this organization on both those counts. The second organization is the World Nuclear Organization, WNO, which is a collective of nuclear operators. Nuclear energy is an extremely profitable business, and the sums of money that it makes per minute are pretty impressive. They, I think, do have the financial clout to be able to deal with this.
When
Brice mentioned, I could not articulate my remark, and therefore I'd like to now clarify what I thought. My name is Kikuchi. For more than 20 years, I cultivated the practitioners of the Christians, and I now work in Paris. Now, responsibility and counterparts. This is one thing, and how we can galvanize or nurture the nation-level public acceptance. These are the topics I'd like to talk about. I'm a humanity majored person, and therefore, when I was a high school student, I learned physics, and by mobilizing all of my knowledge about physics, I tried to follow your discussion. But when I think about who to be responsible for this station, one thing I'd like to say is about Fukushima. You said Fukushima Prefecture has invited the nuclear power industry. However, in the modern history of Japan, how those areas who have attracted the public work it was treated by the central government of Japan, and sometimes they were neglected, and sometimes they had really distorted the actions by the government, and therefore you have to look into the history for that. In this round table discussion, those who are close to the direct damage, the problem, and the modern history of Japan, in many occasions we, general public, sort out many issues that are entangled right now. However, when I want to talk about them, I run out of all the time. Therefore, I don't want to talk about it right now. As to the expertises, including history, economics is one of the areas. Think about the economics as the disciplinary. However, let me go back to the individual responsibility just a little bit. In the past few months, you have been so busy about the bill of the security. Whenever I take part in the protest activities by students, of course their logic is really naive. However, I really cherish their naive arguments. What they have right now that were not available for us is that they talk about their own responsibility, and many people refer to 311 when they were junior high students or high school students. There was a 311, and they felt the irrationality directly, and then that triggers them to think about what is rational and what is irrational. Many students talk about their experiences in these words, and the Constitution as the one individual of general public, they now use the words of obligation and responsibility as one person, and they just stand up to say what they want to they don't want to accept. They speak up. That is a strategy in their context. Rather than the strategy, they want to say that what they don't want to accept is what they want to say no. This is a really new trend that we have never seen. This is a kind of fashion in someone's world. However, I take this trend very positive, and I believe this trend or momentum is very good and a positive way. And what's elucidated as a fact is, as I mentioned already 2 days ago, the government of Japan officially put their booth at the defense military market. In addition to that, the Keidanren Federation says officially that we have to promote the export of the military articles as well as the defense items. We could suspect it. However, this is the first time for Keidanren to say it officially. So, because they have enormous clout in many aspects. For example, think about the 100 millisievert as an example. Those who don't understand is dumb. Scientists who talk about 100 millisievert as stupid. No, I don't think so. They intentionally say it just for the sake of national policy, for the interest of Japan. So what kind of economy Japan has to develop as one of the national policies? They are forced to make selections, and if they find that the nuclear population is good, they by producing plutonium to sell as many military products as possible, if they say it's good for the interest of Japan, they may promote it. Then quasi scientific expertise, ethical expertise, and philosophical conscience should be maintained for us, and we have to use these three the weapons to fight back them, and then we can make the broader consensus. However, we have to be mindful of the counterpart and how counterpart want to make Japan in the future. In that sense, we have to learn the macroeconomics just a little bit. We should not prioritize prioritize macroeconomics over the one life of one person. Rather than that, we have to respect one person. Of course, we have to insist on this point. However, of course, at the same time, we have to consider counterpart. We cannot ignore that the counterparts are too dumb to have a discussion. No way, because if you have such an attitude, nothing can start. So first of all, you have to understand what your counterpart respects and cherishes. Based on that understanding, you can have a constructive discussion. For example, Nobel laureate for the economics in the United States, such as Professor Stiglitz, called the U.S. economy as wartime economy. Therefore, among the expertise, there is such an insight, and therefore we have to learn those in-depth insights from experts. Of course, we have to learn many things. Still, this is very important because this will give us the pathway for us to have the discussion and dialogue with the counterpart while respecting each individual life. We try to find the common ground. Of course, we have to clearly say this is not good, this is good. And then the opening up of ourselves each other, we can see the future or the pathway towards a better future at least. That's what I want to say. Small, short response to you. Don't take me wrong, because I share the same feeling. However, speaking of the responsibility, there are many layers and levels of responsibility. What I wanted to say is that suppose there is a problem, who to assume the responsibility for that issue? That was my topic. If you look at the current youth, they move toward the future with their responsibility. Yes, I know it, and I agree with that. When 3/11 happened or Fukushima accident happened, it's wrong to ask the citizens of Fukushima to assume that responsibility. I believe it's wrong. It's not appropriate. Now, types of responsibility. There's a legal responsibility. As to the concept of the responsibility, there's a philosophical responsibility, and there's a legal responsibility. In addition to that, this is a system. The Kishi-san mentioned IAEA and the WNO. These discussions, who to assume responsibility, actually we limit ourselves to that. Rather than that, we need to broaden our perspectives, as Dr. Kishi mentioned. Therefore, we have to define responsibility in a wider sense. That may give us more insights. Now, the third person or fourth person in that row, Idogawa-san, you may be the first to shoot up your hand, so please speak up first. Thank you very much for allowing me to say a word. First of all, there is some colors, some bias of the Dr. Shimizu's remark. You mentioned many aspects of responsibility, but what I want to ask you to whether or not you can prove the responsibilities. I officially ask you to prove responsibilities in your context. I was the head of the town that invited the nuclear power plant. There are many background aspects as well as the history of why we had to invite nuclear power plant. I believe you know the original state, right? When the siting was determined, you should know the conditions where siting was determined. Please give us your proof or your rationale in writing to me. Please remember it. Now, at my individual question to you, you said that it cannot be possible the nasal bleeding accident, and actually I wanted to ask you to prove it. When I was the head of the town, I appointed you to one of the committee members for the development of my town, and you wanted to have the intention of appointing you as the committee members is that I wanted to hear the positive remarks and opinions. That's why I appointed you. However, for some reasons, I had to resign from the head of the town. Even in the meantime, you said many things, Mr. Mizu. And then you can assert that Fukushima prefecture people have to assume responsibility. By what account or by what ground can you say that? You have to answer this in writing, please. Because now when we think about responsibility, we lodged lodge our case to the court, and there are many types of responsibilities, numerous numbers of responsibilities, and I'd like to bring all of those types of responsibilities to the court because I want to prevent the accident anymore in the future for NISA and TEPCO. I have already said this already. Whenever opportunities are available, or if TEPCO or the government officials come to the town office, I said this. Whenever trouble happened, I said this to TEPCO over and over again, making sure that you should not cause any accident and please prevent any fallout at any cost. However, despite of that, accident happened. In addition to that, I exposed my town people to the radiation. I am responsible. I feel that I am responsible because I could not prevent the 311. Therefore, I stand up to take my responsibility because my town people were exposed to radiation. And I assert I am responsible for this situation. This is my own judgment, and I am the one who determined that. I was not told to take responsibility for that. But this is my logic, and this is how I take responsibility. And if I find something as my responsibility, yes, I take it. However, we have to clarify who to responsible. Citing is an issue. There is a monetary issue, financial issue. If you talked about it, plight of evacuees. These are the people I have to represent. Do you think those evacuees really wanted to have the nuclear power plant? And they have chosen to be evacuees, going away from their dear old town. Please listen to what my town people say. You are totally wrong. So this issue of responsibility, it's really the very difficult issue. Therefore, when you talk about responsibility, you have to be grounded on the proof. You mentioned the IAEA, and I believe it's totally right, because in our society, we tend to be limited ourselves, just pointing out our fingers at the others and pointing our fingers at ourselves. However, please think about what I mentioned, because ultimate responsibility, when you think about the ultimate responsibility, please reflect our victims' opinions, survivors' opinions, please.
So you mentioned in writing. Can we do that later? Well, speaking about responsibility, well, individuals have to take responsibility. If we just focus on individual, then one just blames oneself. So there's a concern about that as well. Without forgetting the subject I, we have to clarify the responsibilities. So that's a very important point. Sega-san raised the hand faster, but there's a question to Aihara-san. Well, it's a different topic, but so Aihara-san, can you answer the question? So the question is related to propaganda. This accident is not Fukushima nuclear accident. It's a typical Fukushima first nuclear accident. And I listened to Aihara-san from yesterday, and you made a very important message out. And there are two sides of a coin of the one event. So Fukushima's people were deserted and abandoned, and it's difficult. I don't know why the citizen movement is not really spreading out, and what's the significance of having this conference in Tokyo. So it's also related to who. And can you answer the question, please? Well, thank you very much for the question. Well, through my interview activities and there are people who evacuated on their own decision, and I interviewed those people. Particularly Ibaraki University, Mr. Haraguchi said that because of the zoning done by the government, so with the actual damages or the government support, or some regions are not getting any attention from the media and the government due to the government's zoning. So there are such regions or areas. So the damage has been widely spread. Rather than calling it Fukushima nuclear accident, we should call it TEPCO's first reactors Daiichi accident. Well, that's what I actually use in my writing. People just say Fukushima and Fukushima. When we say Fukushima within Fukushima, that means Fukushima City. So there's a Koriyama City, Iwachi City, Aizu Wakamatsu City within, and Hamadori, Namiemachi. That's part of the Fukushima prefecture, Futagomachi as well. The different villages and towns. Fukushima, the word Fukushima is very vague and it covers wide area of our area actually. So based on individual experience, there is a universal problem based on individual shares. So we have a ground involving people in Tokyo. There was a water contamination in Kanamachi for the Tokyo area. There's a lack of food at the stores in Tokyo, and there are some people who have difficulty coming home in Tokyo. So the impact has been felt not only in Fukushima but also in other areas. But when we talk about this nuclear accident, well, as a symbol, it'd be easier to understand. But we just refer it to a Fukushima accident when we talk about the decontamination, or we just focus on particular phenomena to describe the entire nuclear accident. The northern part of Chiba, Ibaraki, or the Katsushika, eastern part of Katsushika in Tokyo, or Miyagi as well, or Ichinoseki and Iwate, well, the damage has covered those wider areas. So there's a much wider area with the contamination spreading out. Well, I don't know if I was answering my question. Did I answer your question? And regarding the discussion about responsibility, I'm on the same page as Cecil. When we talk about responsibility, then someone has to take responsibility for something bad. And then discussion will be heated, and also self-responsibility discussion. Fukushima should take responsibility on their own, partially. As Kajiro-san said earlier, when we talk about our responsibility, or when we talk about other people's liability or responsibility, not only with the people, we have to look at the next generation, future generation. We have to pay attention to the responsibility for the future generation. Are we talking about the future generation as well, or the global community? So we have to look at a scope of responsibility. What's being covered in the concept of responsibility? When we talk about responsibility in the medical community, in Good Samaritan Act was enacted in the US and Europe. That's a retroactive recourse to the result medically. So based on the US medical perspective, people help others, people trust others. Without that, society won't work. So Good Samaritan Act was enacted, and well, this means that when someone was lying on the road, or someone was drawing in water or the river, even there are no specialists around, but general people help those people, and they just try to help them to breathe again. But this person died. So even when that happens, those people who help others will not be accused of criminal liabilities because they have a good intention to help other people. So there's a social agreement to describe the action. So only people can help others, save other people. So based on that concept, US and Europe has a Good Samaritan Act. This is just one of the examples, but without knowing what will be outcome, we think about the responsibility first. Once we start thinking about the responsibility, we will be bothered by what kind of actions we should do when there's an explosion at the nuclear power plant. So when it comes to responsibility, should I run away, or should we ask people in Fukushima to run away as soon as possible? Do I take responsibility for what I said to my friends in Fukushima? There's a Good Samaritan Act. If you have intention to help other people, so based on your decision, you're not liable for what you say or what you do legally. So you're not liable for that if you do something based on a good faith. So there's a social agreement like that. That's important. Otherwise, the society won't work without good faith or the trust on each other. Well, I don't think society will work if that's the case. Thank you very much. Well, you said, well, I don't like the idea that people are good in nature, but well, that's why I just brought the idea of trust. Well, the first in the afternoon, I just raised this first point, but Sega-san and Yoshida-san raised their hands. Would you like to make a comment one by one? My name is Segawa. Based on what Ms. Aihara said, I talk about responsibility on ICRP. I wanted to mention the responsibility for Mr. Yamashita as well. From the first conference, a lot of people talk about responsibility for Mr. Yamashita, but I have to repeat this again because as Mr. Shimizu, this person is not on the list of responsible people. That's why I will have to mention this again. As for the numerous increase of thyroid cancer, which we discussed yesterday, people acknowledge the increase of incidence of such cancer. The initial exposure is one of the most important reasons. Cesium is another reason. But that's the order, I think. Once we confirm the relationship, Mr. Yamashita didn't mention that people should take iodine, and they also return. He also returned people to the original locations. So this person should be responsible for what he did. Someone talk about national policy. So those people who were saying 100 millisievert, oh, that's true. Mr. Yamashita said that he is doing that for the government intention or benefit. So as long as they comply with the national government, they are not liable for what they say legally. But it's true that they have to take a great important responsibility. Before one is decided to be perpetrator or violator, it's a problem to ask someone who maybe is a violator, the offender, to do an investigation. Or Otsuru-san is the subordinate of Mr. Yamashita. So when we look at Fukushima health survey commission. There's a responsibility on that commission. Well, someone who may be just a violator will ask Nagasaki University to conduct such survey. It's not a matter of money, but it's a conflict of interest issue. As long as one sign on the ethical document, that's not good enough. Of course, as Aihara-san said, there is an experimentation on the human bodies. We have to ensure that we will increase any more increase of the exposed subjects. So we have to minimize any more damages by taking actions. Even someone sign on the ethical document, it's not good enough. So other than the evacuation area where there's the highest contamination, they said that there's no issue with the contamination in such areas. There could be other measures taken other than the decontamination. They have done research on such areas. That's not ethical. And furthermore, they talk about the more than 1,000 pages IAEA report. And the report said that to the Japanese government that the research is not the epidemiological research. It's unethical without saying that this is a research. So I acknowledge unethical conduct of the research done by the Japanese government. This is not just with the Fukushima. As for the thyroid cancer, we have to do other research on other than Fukushima. Otherwise, it won't be a valid epidemiological research. So it could be Nagasaki Prefecture if Nagasaki University does the research. So the citizens have done such researches in the neighboring prefectures around Fukushima. So the government should take responsibility for not doing any research on the surrounding areas. Yoshida-san.
Thank you very much. My name is Yoshida. Now, accountability is what I'm going to talk about. After 3/11, there are many experts meetings were held, and there is a decision made. And then, in some ways, some administrative decisions were made, such as zoning, as well as the threshold, such as 120. At any rate, the experts who made a decision did not explain for what's been done. Usually, the government officers made an explanation.
検討会議の方は記者会見が行われていますけれども、
There is a press conference held for the Fukushima Health Management Survey. Usually, the expert meeting comes first, and after that, in the following press release. Also, this is called the press release. However, it's really rare for experts to answer to the questions raised by the journalists. For example, in the radiation protection, workers at NBP and non-government officials, workers such as bus drivers, truck companies, the exposure limit should be set when the next accident happens. And in order to define that, the different expert meeting was formed. And again, Mr. Shunichi Yamashita assumed the head of this committee.
今は1ミリです。
Right now, the criteria, as I said, that 1 milli for those workers. Cabinet office officials say many things. However, at any rate, 1 milli. However, with this 1 milli criteria, no more rescue if the accident happens because trucks cannot go in with that criteria. That's why they will have more discussions. You can observe and witness that meeting. However, because you are observers, you are not allowed to speak up. And once the meeting completes, experts are sent back first to go out, and then the general public can go back. Therefore, there's no occasion of mingling, but when the experts and the general public, this is intentional segregation. Therefore, for example, if some experts believe 20 millisievert is good enough, they have to clarify the rationale in their own words. They have to articulate the ground for why they believe 20 millisievert is all right. There must be some occasions for that. Then the IAEA, the terminology, the relocation and evacuation are the IAEA jargons, and therefore, if you refer to this time report, you find the relocation or eating in Japanese translation, and if you refer to the glossary of the report, evacuation is to avoid and mitigate the short-term exposure. Evacuation is such a measure, and if people may be exposed for a longer term. For example, if they have to move for 1 month or two, then the term is relocation instead of evacuation, according to the glossary of the IAEA report. Then the definition of the relocation is to avoid acute exposure immediately, just like the taking a shelter, people go away from the contaminated area. And this can be on the continuum of the taking shelters, and sometimes evacuation period can be longer at around 1 year, or if the ending cannot be in sight, and if the permanent relocation, then that movement should be regarded as a settlement. These are the classification according to the glossary. In Japan, when 3/11 happened, in the guideline of the nuclear disaster prevention, relocation and the settlement are not referred, and that's why they had to use the word of planned evacuating zone. This is a newly coined word. Anyway, this is what they said. However, as you find in the report of the IAEA, it should be called relocation, depending on how long the people have to take the shelter. At least, if that state continues for a month or two, according to the IAEA's definition, it's relocation. If the government of Japan uses those terminologies, what are your impressions? We have to think about that for this classification of each different word. Now, you mentioned relocation. Then the backside of the responsibility, we have to think about the effect of the responsibility, and we have received a question about it, and I have received 2 questions, and both of them are very important, but it's a kind of out of the place, and therefore I'd like to follow the natural course of the discussions. Therefore, first of all, anyone, there is the lift of the evacuees zones one after another. In addition to that, also it's limited to the Fukushima prefectural people. However, there's no compensation, and the support given to the voluntary evacuees and other evacuees. And if the people can work, they can work. However, if they want to go back to the Fukushima, they told that there are the assistance and the support available. They are criticized. However, we have to protect those people because if situation is left intact, I believe there are many people killing themselves. This is an open question, and when I look at my watch, time is very limited, and therefore it may be difficult for you to answer to this question. However, speaking of responsibility, there are many things made invisible, and background of the front scene, there are many things going on, and we are put in the black. For this matter, if you want to make a comment, anyone, please. How about you, Chiba-san? Do you have a say? Yes. Affected people are forced in very difficult situations, and why Fukushima people don't speak up? Maybe this is true to all of the affected people, but this is a typical remark made by the general public. There are many complicated factors, and therefore it's very difficult to answer to this question, and I'd like to share one of the examples for that. Risk communication is now conducted across the nation under the leadership of the government of Japan. However, how it becomes popular, for example, there's a seminar on the importance of diet. There's a fester talking about the diet. Famous chefs are invited to have the cooking schools. And there are some events to invite people to go to the fruit producing areas in which children can have hands-on experiences, just in enjoyment. And another attempt as the sample the school meals. There are many events and initiatives are going on at a rapid pace in many places. As to the school meal for children, I believe this is related to the human rights issue. That's why I have opposed for about 18 months. However, forcefully, the director of the Board of Education bulldozed the bill of school meal. However, together with me, there are mothers who shared valleys. They couldn't speak up, however, they were happy to apply their signatures. And then whenever events happen, including sampling event as well as the affairs, they came to say that it's really good because their children enjoyed it. However, these people cannot see the hidden agenda, and they don't know where they are led. They don't know the background hidden agenda of the government. They just feel that, okay, it's good for my children for recreation. However, the understanding of the safe or the PA, public acceptance, is established. They don't realize it. However, that is a take on the side of the government, and that's why everything was just ignored. And that's why irrational situation can happen. For example, the issue of the return of the Futaba town people and the issue of the voluntary evacuees put on the assumption that it's natural for them to go back, and they are led to go back. They are brainwashed to believe that return to their hometowns are good, but actually it may be not. However, the citizens do not it, and they don't realize it, and therefore, unrealizingly, or without any subjective intention of willing, they may be on the side of government. So there's an absence of such an awareness. There's a lack of the perception that they actually work for the government. There are many mothers who are the voluntary evacuees, and why they cannot understand the situation is because they are swallowed down without being noticed that what are the hidden agenda of the government. Therefore, although they face the issue in front of them, however, they don't realize it. It's not answer. However, by sharing the very specific examples, we can see the actual situation. Now, the heavy issue remains. Actually, as the chair, I have to turn the microphone to the general chair or master chair to go into the master discussion, summarizing what we have discussed yesterday and today. But before that, I'd like to ask Dr. Shimizu to share his views, and then as to the responsibility, because the title of your presentation in the morning is right to be responsible. Of course, you don't have to be limited to your presentation in the morning, but I want you, Mesken-san, to share your view after Shimizu-san. Thank you very much. As to the Dogawa-san's remark, I want to say a word, just one word. the meaning of discussing responsibility theory, who to assume responsibility, what is the meaning for that? Those who are asked to assume responsibility takes what kind of actions and act. So future actions of those who are asked to take responsibility is related. It's not about only Fukushima Prefecture. Just to vaguely say, the local government of Fukushima, when you talk about the responsibility, there was an act done. And for those previous act, if we accuse them, condemn them, it's meaningless. As Itogawa-san mentioned, whether it be Aomori, Fukushima, or Fukui, relatively speaking, host communities were financially dire, and therefore they were kind of forced to choose to accept NPP because of the financial situation. Therefore, it's meaningless for us to blame them. Rather than that, for instance, the 4 towns that accepted NPP, there's a request as to the way how the NPP should be operated in the future. Please clearly say that it's a mistake on your side to accept and attract NPP. The Fukushima Prefecture said that all of the reactors should be decommissioned. However, before that, we have to review of the history and background. Of course, I know there are many complicated factors and reasons. However, you have made a wrong decision to attract and accept NPP, and you have to appeal your mistakes in the past. Just one thing, if you acknowledge the past mistakes, then the future discourse for the Japan will be totally different. What we have to do, such the futuristic-oriented responsibility theory should be developed, because we have to think about the future, and it should be applied when we talk about the responsibility of the whole general public. That is my context. So the concept of a perpetrator should be separated out from the responsibility talk.
ちょっとお待ちいただいて。
Can you please wait for a minute? There's an order to speak up. Can you please ask him or her to speak into the microphone? There's no sound feed. We need to interpret what you say. Therefore, please make sure to use the microphone. Anyway, you have already completed your remark. In opening and closing, I want Mr. Shimizu to share his view, and I am now in the position to say something critical to you in closing and opening. Then the wording and the logics are not wrong. However, first of all, condemnation. It's not a condemnation, because it's a part of the pursuant of the responsibility, and therefore please separate condemnation from the pursuant of the responsibility. Because if we don't know where to go to identify the person who to be responsible, maybe we are targeting the wrong person or party, and then you mention that together with or in addition to that, such a parallel wording can be used instead of not or otherwise. And in addition to that, including history as well as the economic background, we have to think about this issue. And then Shimizu-san, Dogawa-san, and all of us can use the common language to be on the same page. Sorry for sharing my comment.
We are running out of time, but Mr. Meston, do you have any comments to make briefly?
Maybe as a bridge between this session and the general conclusions. I think we can say that the Fukushima crisis is not over yet. We may be in post-accident situations, but we are certainly not in post-crisis situations. There remains serious issues of social misery. health risks, not the perception of health risks, but real health risks. Issues of resettlement, evacuation and return, compensation we have been discussing here. Last but not least, a feeling of frustration with the undemocratic way the energy problem is continued to be tackled by the Japanese government. So, talking about the first responsibility, I think for the government, taking these issues of social misery serious and taking responsibility for seeking solutions would not be a matter of money or national reputation. It would be a matter of social justice, as I also said this morning in my presentation. Social justice towards the victims of the accident, but actually also towards all citizens of Japan. But I think without a real dialogue among everybody concerned, finding consensus on these solutions will remain to be hindered by suspicion, polarization, and conflict. So if we talk about the right to be responsible, that could also translate as the right to participate in making sense of the problem. That is still not too late. So the first concern, I think, should be now to organize that dialogue, a dialogue on a national level. And I think, this is my opinion, this is proposal, I think there is a need to establish a committee to promote and facilitate that dialogue on a national level. And of course it should involve citizens and NGOs and representatives from the government and from the nuclear industry. But I think the initiative for that committee and for the dialogue should come from the academic world as a joint initiative of science, humanities, and arts. That would, I think, be the only way to set up a credible dialogue that cannot be neglected, that has to be taken serious. And it would also be a test in terms of social justice, as every party that would refuse to participate would declare itself to be guilty.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. I'm sure there are a lot of people who would like to make a comment, but originally, well, we are 10 minutes behind the schedule, so we are about to summarize for what we have discussed so far for this conference. As for the wrap up of the discussion at the round table, I and Sebastian will chair the final session. Thank you very much, Mr. Kajiura Shimizu Sensei. At the very last session, this is most painful discussion we have to go through to discuss the responsibility. That was difficult, this topic to deal with. Well, people will be reminded of the difficult past. We still have to continue to have discussion on this matter, and I feel the same way that I have to continue discussing this matter. We have to, like I said, continue with this discussion. We have to keep the importance in mind. Well, we have a lot of challenges we have to address, but let me just summarize what we have discussed so far. As Mr. Miskin said, so he mentioned a direction that we would like to discuss and going forward. So people involved in this issue or the problem, where we would like to be headed for in solving this issue. So particularly, we have had this Citizen Scientist International Symposium. So within this symposium, we have had discussion, or Iwate-san, or those people who have been participating in those symposiums. We have dealt with important topics so far. So from the Japanese scientists who are responsible for health and other important areas, but there are many comments made by those natural scientists. Fukushima crisis isn't over, and Fukushima's crisis has been even more serious. And there's still a problem with Fukushima, as Ms. Aihara said earlier. Well, how should we address more serious deteriorating situation for Fukushima as a scientist? What should we expect as a scientist? Mr. Moriguchi from Tokyo University, who's in charge of environmental evaluation, and also he's a panel of the government member governmental panels. Thank you very much. Let me say a few words. My name is Moriguchi from Tokyo University. To be honest, I wasn't sure if I should attend this session or not. But as we discussed, there's accountability for the explanation done by the academics or scientists. Well, as academia or as a scientist, I have been involved in the government panel. Let me just make a comment as a panelist for the Japanese government. Well, I have been involved in several discussions. About 2 years ago, there's a special task force about 2 years ago to talk about the NSC. So someone mentioned that the bureaucrats should mention the name when they make a draft. So in NSC, decision has been led up to the chair of the committee. I didn't agree to that. So we'd like to have all the comments made by the committee members, like to keep a record of individual comments made by the committees on NSC website. What kind of comment I made for the 20-minute vote, and there's a record of which comment of mine has been reflected into the general comment by the committee. After the report is made, people tend not to look at the report after it's been published. So one request that I made was that what I just reported may not make progress. So I'd like to make a follow-up activity on what I said, so that we can have a regular meetings to check on the progress. And NSC, I don't know if this type of meetings has been done. Maybe they could have done better, but well, this is ongoing project, and I'd like to follow up on what they have decided at NCS. The meetings of the people who are responsible for environment and health, Dr. Tsuda and I, and 3 other people on the panel who take a cautious approach to the public health. There are external members. And there was an opportunity for us to say a few words to the government. Between Kasuya-san and Kasuga-sensei and Matsuda-san, they had a heated discussion, Tsuda-san and Kasuga-san. And I was in a position to make a comment to their discussion at the committee. As a part of the government panel, or sometimes I have distanced myself from the government panel to make a comment. So Well, maybe the scientist activity are not really seen by the general public that often. Well, I'm not totally unrelated to nuclear industry, but I have been involved in environmental pollution other than nuclear pollution. Dr. Yoshimura talked about the pollution on the road in Kansai area. Well, that was a starting point for me to start my research. The air pollution coming from cars, that's what my topic of research. That's why I was involved in the research on the initial exposure. Well, other than the nuclear expert, but there has to be some specialists in contamination. Well, there are a lot of specialists in this area. Well, I feel a sense of mission to work on my research in this area and having some budget for the research, and I have been successfully presenting my academic paper. What's missing is that, as Mr. Mixer said, he used the word transdisciplinary. We criticize the silo of the administration often, but in the academic field, in many cases, we have a silo problems. It's difficult to have a interdisciplinary communication with other fields. So across the discipline, we have to accumulate the scientific findings is important. And to that end, I have exerted myself to do that. And the other day, Dr. Kasuga participated in this, and she was part of the academic committee, SCAJ, sorry. The word transdisciplinary covers a wider area. It's not just across academic fields. Academic specialists work with people in the society to promote science. And for the benefit of society, scientists will work with the people other than the academic fields. But working with the society to promote society, since not just with the science specialists, but also we have to work with the social study fields So across the academic arena, we have to work with those non-science specialists, also working with the society. We have to take a concrete step toward the goal. So the way we conduct those activities depends on the locality. We have to learn how to do it depending on the local characteristics. There's no textbooks. There's no good examples we can follow. Someone, Aihara-san, said that this is not just related to Fukushima. Well, there's a hotspot in Chiba or Kashiwa, and I have been involved in the activities for hotspot in those areas. I don't have time to go into the details, but with the mayors and cities and citizens and also other specialists, so having a good collaboration with the three government, businesses, and also academia. In terms of responsibilities, why the citizens have to be involved in decontamination? Well, what's interesting is that a lot of people talk about mothers, but in Kashiwa, well, fathers did a good job in this activity. So depending on the regions, the role of citizens or the citizen involvement in society would be different. So having those experiences, so we have to address ongoing challenges in a more constructive, in a more positive manner. There's still room for us to improve the way we do this. And as a scientist, the question how to make a contribution to such an initiative, we have to go through a lot of trials and errors to make it better. I learned a lot today from this conference. and I would like to do whatever I can do. Thank you very much for the opportunity to make a comment. Thank you very much, Mr. Moriguchi. Iwata-san did a good job. As Mr. Mitchell said, dialogue at different levels is important. Well, that's dialogue is missing at the moment at different levels. That causes a frustration at the moment. I'm keenly aware of that. So Dr. Kasuga is a vice chairperson, and she's hoping to have such dialogue with different stakeholders. So one of the ways we can do that is Citizen Scientist International Symposium. So to expand the dialogue at different levels, that will open up new opportunities for all the stakeholders. So across this symposium, we can go into a new area where we can have more collaboration with different people. Question to Mr. Shimizu. There's a question asked earlier at the councils, and there are observers and journalists observing the meetings at the councils. They ask questions, and that's of course important. That's part of the dialogue. But when you chair the prefectural health research committee, is it working well in terms of dialogue? Well, a lot of people question the efficiency of the meetings. Is there any room for you to improve the way it's run? I joined this committee halfway through. Before I joined the committee, well, there was a very severe criticism on the way the committee was run, and they reviewed the way it's run, and they changed the members, or they made the meetings all open to the public. Well, it's hard to say, but it also created a situation. Discussion didn't go as smoothly as we wanted. At the teleconference, here's committee members, and also there are specialists behind us from the university hospital, and journalists ignore us, and they ask questions to the people from the university hospital. And I don't know who is the main participant in this press conference. The reason is that we haven't exhausted discussion within the committee. So as a committee, there is no consensus on the ideas as a committee. Before we have a concrete conclusion, we just have to say something before we have a complete consensus. We have to make a comment. So that is the shortcomings of the way the meeting or the committee has been run. So journalists, of course, would like to ask questions to the doctors from the university hospitals who actually conduct the research. They would like to have a professional opinion, we understand. But since we have the opportunity to have a discussion with the journalists, as a committee member, we would like to report to what we have been discussing at the moment. Without having such opportunity, these are natural settings. The proceedings won't be changed. So we are in a position where we can talk about the interim report. So the situation has been changing for the better. As for the schedule or the time, well, journalists said they don't have enough time to ask questions. Well, I understand it's not a good idea to limit the time allocated to the journalists. Well, there are some people who come from really far away, so we can't have an endless amount of time to allocate for Q&A sessions. So there's a limitation. So it's a, well, thank you very much for answering the question. So honestly, as Mr. Miskin said earlier, I live in Minami Soma. My name is Masakazu Honda, a journalist living in Honma area in Fukushima. What Shimizu-san said isn't really true. As Aihara-san attended the conference, well, please do not say something that is not true at the conference like this. I can't be, well, I want to say something. Well, there are press conferences organized by the journalist group or the prefecture. But this prefectural health survey committee, this particular press conference has also invited free journalists. So this was organized by the major media group with Mr. Suzuki and other specialists. They have a basic information, but there's a bias about the information. But they stop all the questions, and Chair Mr. Hoshi answered the questions, and Mr. Hoshi made a comment that's not necessary for us. That was a waste of our time. So as you said earlier, well, we can't ask questions directly to specialists, even we specify Dr. Suzuki, but we can't ask the questions. And on the 31st of August, prior to the press conference, on Our Planet TV, they suggested that it's a waste of time to conduct such press conference. There's a lot of comments made by Mr. Hoshi with a strong political intentions. We requested Dr. Suzuki to come to the meeting. Please slow down. So, Mr. Shimizu, have you seen the request to have the Dr. Suzuki come to the meeting? So, we made a request for the improvement of the way the press conference is run. This April, there's a symposium in Fukushima to talk about the human rights and also nuclear accident. From Mainichi's newspaper, Mr. Hino called the meeting a secret meeting, and Mr. Shimizu said that there are negative and positive aspects of calling a meeting a secret. Well, I severely criticize what you said, and you said the same thing again. Well, it's regrettable you didn't share the truth here in this meeting. Even one of the representative journalists sent a recommendation to improve the committee members' proceedings, but there's no improvement done. Well, there's an imminent issue in Fukushima.
And I like to talk very much and honestly, frankly, which is that I sympathize with you, Dr. Shimizu, because when we talk about the comparison between the difference between Okinawa and Fukushima, I feel kind of the same, because Okinawa, in a way, well, they actually were forced upon the U.S. Army and the U.S. base, and that is not the case in Fukushima because they invited, and so there was a farmer breeder of cows who were actually continuing the farming activities in Fukushima, faced with the contaminated cows. And Yasutomi-san is also an activist in one area. So I've been talking about these people, and been talking always about the comparison between the Okinawa and Fukushima, that there is always this comparison between these two places, but they are completely different because Okinawa did not invite US base. But Inoue Sensei said, "Are you crazy?" I felt so sick of that discussion and that situation because Shinzo Sensei, Professor Shinzo, said, "You are talking about such thing." And the same exact, and another professor of University of Tokyo said exactly the same thing as you just said. And I also scolded him that actually at the end of the day, Okinawa and Fukushima are the safe because economical point of view, the U.S. base was important from economic perspective for Okinawa. The economy would not stand on its feet without the base. So there were pro-U.S. based people in Okinawa as well. So when you look at the structure, the true structure of the victim and the perpetrator, that is becoming invisible if you keep talking about the difference between Okinawa and Fukushima. Well, I also would like to add one point about that, which is that in Kageura-san, in the very beginning, you said that the one characteristic of discussion, well, Shimizu-san said, Shimizu-san angered the former mayor Idogawa. Well, maybe you don't understand why you angered him so much. Well, that was because Kageura-san, initially, you said that you talked about the general relationship between the victims and perpetrators, and you keep talking about this as a general concept, but you never talked about the point of view of you being the actual stakeholder. And Idogawa-san, he was very much the stakeholder who was very much impacted. He was the mayor at the time. He evacuated with the entire town of Namie. Certain people really sacrificed themselves, like Sakurai-san. He stayed on so that every resident under his jurisdiction has left. So Idogawa-san is very much talking about himself. So Shimizu-san, I think you should have talked about a bit more from your own perspective, personal perspective, and that would have prevented Idogawa-san becoming so angry. And talking about my personal perspective, I have been living in Minami-Soma for 3 years after the accident, and that's my personal story. Well, so the definition of citizen scientist, what I learned is that each and one of us take our own actions. So in that sense, that perspective was missing from Shimizu-san's discussion earlier. That's why you angered Idogawa-san. I didn't mean that I was talking over all of your head. I didn't literally mean that. I said that because at that committee meeting, at the press conference, there were certain procedures. When we received a question from the media, there were certain procedures, and there was also an issue of time. I'm not getting the voices. I'm certain. I'm sorry. Just very briefly, I'd like to comment because earlier you talked about the views of the committee is not really fixated. It's also always case by case. Well, it's been 4 years since I've been reporting on this matter, and every time at the press conference, they always continue to say that there is no relationship with the radiation. That's what the chairperson says. Well, if he's saying that he's not fixated on one idea, if he doesn't have a fixed idea, well, then why is he repeating himself so much? Well, very delicate matter to answer that question. Well, the chair was looking at the overall atmosphere of the room and the environment, and I think he commented like that. Well, it's been 4 years every day that I've been reporting, and I've been at the press conference, and I'm talking about air, the atmosphere, he has observed the discussions that has taken place in the committee on a regular basis, and based on that, I think he's making such comments. But at the same time, it's true that I sometimes object to his thinking. So in that sense, in terms of the committee opinion, what he says officially should not be taken as the official overall opinion of the committee. It's his opinion. Well, if that is the case, then you are really reversing the basis of the discussion when it comes to the public health and the radiation. You just said that his opinion is a personal opinion? That is just reversing the whole foundation of the discussion. Well, interim report. We are trying to finalize the interim report. And if that becomes an official document, then that would be the document which you should look at to confirm the official view of the committee. So the thyroid cancer, the people who were diagnosed as thyroid cancer, a lot of people who were diagnosed as having cysts, the children, how should they interpret the issue currently and now? Well, we need a bit more time as committee in order to come up with the conclusion. And also, well, I'd like to say this really in public now. And what is your personal attitude and your opinion about this matter? Because I'd like to ask you that question. I'd like to interview you. Don't we have time? Because I think if everyone else is interested, can I ask you that question? Just 5 minutes. What kind of time are you asking about? No, I just want some time. If Chairman Hoshi of the committee is answering in that way, and what do you think, and what is your attitude in response to that? You are vice chair, but you have a different opinion. You are a committee mentor. What is your stance if it differs from his opinion as the chair? I am not a doctor. I am not expert in medicine. I don't have the capability to make such judgment. But my role in the committee and in the Fukushima Medical Survey, my role is to serve so that I can create confidence in these activities among citizens and residents. 100 millisievert, for example, indicating that threshold and saying there's no impact below that threshold, or, for example, confirming and checking on the baseline with the assumption of the no impact of radiation. How about the baseline? So these are the certain thinkings that have reappeared and researched in different places, and that is why I continue to voice my opinion against such statements. So that's one of my role, so that I can increase the credibility of these activities, be it the Fukushima Medical Study Survey or the Commission's activities. Well, this is turning into a very long discussion indeed, and we did not have any intention of going into that line of discussion. Well, Shimizu-san, I know that you feel the objection and that there are issues in the Fukushima medical studies and also in the Commission's activities. You talked and you gave us concrete examples of what are the issues, and I think we can bring it back home and connect it to future discussions. A lot of people are very much interested in this matter, so we would like to continue to follow up on this issue as well. But going back to the original discussion, and in terms of the future directions, well, Dr. Musso, you have been in the CSRP symposium in the past. This is the first time for Dr. Masu. And Dr. Keys, you have been here many, many times. And this time around in 2015, this is somewhat different. I hope that you had the impression that our discussion has deepened compared to the past symposiums. And based on this year's experience, we need to think about the future in terms of the future of our dialogue. Well, you are all scientists. So from that perspective, perhaps, I'd like to ask you what the roles of the scientists are in terms of the direction of the dialogue that should take place here. So I'd like to ask your opinion, and after that, I'd like to ask Iwata-san to close.
Yes, this is, I think, my fourth visit. I think overall it's been very encouraging, because I think this symposium, as it has taken place, has matured each year, and again has matured from last year, which was, I think, a very good symposium as well. I'm quite optimistic that the threshold business will be addressed, and I think it is the role of the scientific community to bring that to the attention of committees such as the medical committee, Fukushima Medical Committee, and I'm some optimism that that's happening. I am pessimistic on one point, and that is that I think I'm seeing more and more that the trust of the population has been lost, and that is going to, if Chernobyl is anything to go by, that is going to lead to the psychosocial effect and more health damage as a result of the accident. And I think here again, the scientific community, the scientific experts, have a particular role to impress the need to regain the trust of the population. But yes, I think the future, the proposal for the committee that Dr. Mishkin's made, I think that the academic community is the right part from Japan to bring forward that meeting point of all the parties involved. And I think the international community of scientists will be very happy to participate and cooperate in that. So, thank you for the invitation to be able to attend this meeting. It's been very, very stimulating and interesting and enjoyable. Thank you.
I would echo Dr. Baverstock's comments. I think what has happened over the last 4 years has been a learning experience for all the parties. Unfortunately, those who've borne the difficulties of relocation and evacuation are still suffering, and it's taken a while for the informed opinion in the academic community and in government to catch up with matching the science with the distress of the evacuated people. And I don't think it helps to blame anyone. You certainly shouldn't blame the victim. You certainly shouldn't blame the academic community or government, because it was a new experience for everybody, put on top of all the disaster with the tidal wave itself. I mean, and the radiation impact was something that was almost an afterthought right at the time of the disaster, because government was dealing with so much else. So one has to support all the efforts to help the victims, but I think if the dialogue can become more conciliatory, both from the scientific point of view and the social point of view, and Dr. Meskin's suggestion about an academically based committee would be very helpful, I think. So once again, thank you for having the privilege of being part of this discussion.
think I'm too hungry to say very much. But
あまりにお腹が
I also want to thank the committee for inviting me to participate. I would suggest that a simple pragmatic approach to some of the scientific problems is to collect the questions that the people are asking, the questions that the people want answered, let's have an academic committee, an independent committee, to attempt to make some answers and to translate them and disperse them, communicate them, and I welcome the opportunity to continue in that role in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, as the organizer, this is the person who have planned and developed this symposium. Mr. Iwata, can you please some word including the future vision for the team? First of all, thank you very much for your long time for the past 3 days. I tried to organize everything as much as possible. Of course, I'm not alone. However, as the organizer, I don't want to speak up, and therefore, I don't want to one-sidedly talk at the meta level, and sometimes I feel always ambivalent feelings whether I have to speak up or I shouldn't. However, I'd like to make some remark in conclusion. Now, after the break, I have lost my mobile phone, and I believe that it was somewhere around you. And therefore, if you happen to find my mobile phone, please bring it to the reception counter, and it makes me so happy. And now you're surprised to see how simple I am. Anyway, on day 1, my concern is that, which is related to the Fukushima Health Management Survey, the absence of scientific discussion may deteriorate the psychological state of affected people. I realize that by living there in 2 years, and right now I go to and from Fukushima and Tokyo, but I see it. And therefore, as to the health management survey, this is maybe for the management survey. However, the scientific discussions did not exist. And although the press conference was held, however, the banners are not good, and banners are actually prohibited at the press conference, as Mr. Shimizu mentioned. I witnessed it. Another point I'd like to refer as the scientific matters. I'm not trained as a scientist in the training. However, we can take this issue as the issue of the modern history of Japan, but there's an innate problem of the science, and the science itself cannot resolve such an innate problem. There is such a paradox, and for the first time for the past 5 years, this is the first attempt to introduce a different system of knowledge than science, because we'd like to take science with a different perspective of art. That is what we tried on day 1, and then on day 2, which has garnered the highest interest, that is public health, and therefore related people are invited on day 2. And in this session 1 on day 2, more than ever, we had a discussion on the councils of Ministry of Environment, and there is the committees of the Fukushima Prefecture, and we have invited those experts. And then with these experts, we can talk about the discussion of the F100 millisievert as well as the thyroid cancer. That is the intention, to invite those experts. However, we could not actually invite those experts because of our poor ability. The ICRP committee members were originally invited. However, due to the schedule conflict, they could not attend the session on day 2. In that sense, yesterday's discussion, by the way, another thing, I have to express my apology to all of you. That is, I asked Kasuga-san to make the report. However, different from my intention, because when in the planning phase and when I raised the request, I said I had to express my apology because when I look at the yesterday's discussion, Dr. Shibuya, the team issued the epidemiological paper, apart from who is the author for this, and there are some unpersuaded items. However, the committee members, councils, and the advisory board experts who attended those expert meetings, the papers issued by these expert meetings and councils compared to the past reports, it's much better in my feeling. Therefore, I communicated this. Of course, this report, though much better, is not perfect. And after that, the Williams paper introduced by Dr. Tsuda, the thyroid cancer identified in the current health management survey, and there are polarized arguments, as we heard in the yesterday's discussion. And to me, and maybe I have to say for us, it's a really good experience of learning, because there are two totally polarized arguments existed, and based on that, we now realize that there are arguments going on. If there were William, our discussion would have been better. Therefore, in my perspective, at this moment, there's a known fact, and there's available information. Based on that, through the scientific process and the procedures, maybe the extreme arguments can be existed, and I believe that is the current situation. Then, under this situation, we have to answer to these arguments. However, both extreme arguments can be established. Do we have to take the precautionary principle to take actual actions? This is one step further than the science, because it's related to the public health action as well as the medical care action. So through these stages, again, today I enjoyed the social arguments, such as how we can build consensus. Of course, at this moment of time, we cannot answer all of these questions today. However, I believe that we can get one step closer to resolve these issues, and therefore, I really appreciate your effort. Now, the future objective,
説得というか
the persuasion, dialogue and discussions are necessary in some areas, and then we have to do discussions. And this is the part of the procedures of science. This is a matter of course. However, we have to do such a matter of course procedures, and we have to do this in a public manner, in an open way. And then we can alleviate vague, ungrounded worries and misgivings. Of course, we have to walk the talk, meaning that actual actions and measures are necessary. And then the unnecessary or ungrounded fears and threats can be alleviated or eradicated. And if the fear is grounded, and then we can take actual action by eliminating the cause of the fear. And then Sebastian Pufferbook says it fantasy. I know your idea. You want to call this fantasy. Yes, on one side, the situation is really hard. However, this is an unprecedented matter, and we needed to make a new attempt by employing many approaches, and this is what we have to do in the future too. And therefore, in the next year, in the next fall, we plan to have the symposium in the fall of 2016. We reviewed the venue and the timing of 2012, and we'd like to choose Inawashiro or Koriyama as the venue, just like in 2012. And at that time, we'd like to try to invite ICRP committees as well as the council members, as well as the committee members of the Ministry of Environment. because there are so-called experts, and therefore I'd like to invite those experts in many organizations and institutions, because we have to have a scientific discussion in a public manner. And then finally, who needs to make the final decision? To me, personally speaking, it resides on the officials. I don't think that it resides on the officials or bureaucrats of government agencies. And I am not the one who needs to answer this question. Anyway, please remember that the next symposium will be held actually October 2016. Please pencil in the symposium schedule, October 2016. The exact date is not known. Have you ever determined the exact date? From 8th to 10th, from 8th to 10th of October 2016, 8, 9, and 10. By the way, mobile phone, please find my mobile phone. If someone finds the mobile phone, give it to Iwata-san, great relief. Now, we also feel a great sigh of relief. I have attended this meeting several times already, and then together with the proof bike, I served as the co-chair. Lastly, when the summary is given by Sebastian-san, it gives us a huge relief. This is my experience, and therefore, just like previously, I'd like to ask Sebastian-san to give us the summary remark, and then we can beautifully conclude this year's symposium.
Ein schwerer Kernkraftwerksunfall hat auch seine netten Seiten. Ein schwerer Kernkraftwerksunfall hat auch seine netten Seiten.
重大な事故、重い面があるんだ。
There are good sides to the grave, severe nuclear power plant accident.
私はこの事故によって日本でたくさんの友人を得ました。
Because I was able to make many precious friends in Japan. So I would like to thank you for this fact.
Habe ich mich nicht mit Fukushima beschäftigt, sondern ich war in den großen Demonstrationen vor dem Parlament.
実はですね、こちらに来て木曜日の夜と金曜日の夜は
Having arrived in Japan on Thursdays and Fridays, these were the first 2 days, I actually was focused much more on the demonstration that is taking place in front of the Japanese Diet, the parliament. It was very impressive. The demonstration was very impulsive. You, of course, know very much more about this demonstration than myself.
Tausende von Leuten mitgezogen haben mit ihren Sprüchen.
私は何時間もそこに立っていて
I was standing there for many hours and saw with my own eyes how students were passionate and emphatic in talking towards the public.
An Hiroshima und Nagasaki denken und die sich mit Fukushima beschäftigen.
私の夢というのは
My dream is that the demonstrators turn their eyes not only on the Securities Act issue, but also on the issues of Nagasaki, Hiroshima, and on the Fukushima disasters as well. That's my dream.
In Europa und auch in Japan mit den Säbeln gerasselt wird.
今ね、恐ろしいと思うのは
What is fearful today in Japan, in Germany, and in Europe is this motivation to start a war. We are hearing the footsteps of the armies in Germany. That expression is rattling. We are hearing the rattling of the sables. And that noise is being heard from Japan, from Germany, and from Europe. That seems to be the noise and the sound of this era. Another concern I have is that since many years, Japan and Germany have been cooperating in terms of military activities.
私は
I believe that these two countries of Germany and Japan should cooperate in other areas than military.
Die Hälfte dieses Kongresses machen jetzt zum 5. Mal.
私たちがこの会をやっているのはさっきから科学者の話が出てます。
We have been talking about scientists. The reason why we are holding this symposium is for the sake of citizens and scientists, so that we are intending this for the citizens as well. So my dream is to remove the fears and anxiety of the citizens, and I believe that that is one of the overarching objectives of this symposium. I am not really saying this from somewhere high above from the pedestal, because I'm saying that the exact same issue is present in Germany.
Kaum noch möglich macht, in der Öffentlichkeit offen miteinander zu reden.
ドイツで
In Germany, actually, a public debate, well, there are certain pressures and movements in Germany that is generating fear among people to make public debates and voice their opinion publicly.
Die Überwindung der Angst und der Entschluss der Bürger, von einem Tag auf den anderen angstfrei zu reden, war ein wesentlicher Schritt, um ein altes System beiseite zu schieben.
私は1980
In 1989, I was there at a certain type of revolution, and I'm glad that I was there, because before that time, I was full of anxiety. I was able to overcome such anxiety at that time, and were able to see some light in the future. So the need and importance of overcoming anxiety is something that I learned at that time. Back then, we were talking about unification of Germany, East and West, but no one thought that that would be possible. I was very much anxious and worried, but that was possible. Everyone thought it would be impossible, but it was achieved.
Zeit treten eher rechtsorientierte Leute mit eher linksorientierten Leuten gemeinsam auf und kommen zu ganz ähnlichen Schlüssen.
ドイツで最近ちょっと問題だなというか怖いなと。
A recent issue in Germany that I am fearing about is that someone who are towards the extreme right are voicing similar opinions in similar opportunities or occasions with someone who are rather in the extreme left.
Ja, diese Leute reden viel offener miteinander und mit der Öffentlichkeit als die Politiker und diese in Schubladen einsortierten verschiedenen Medien. Das kennen.
ちょっと危ないなと。
What I also believe is quite dangerous is that extreme rights and extreme lefts are, in a way, joining hands and voicing very clearly and loudly their opinions, while the same is not true for someone more towards the center. These extreme left and rights have, in a way, a concordance of their opinions that are becoming more and more conspicuous in Germany.
Begegnet und vielleicht könnte man über die Probleme, die sich daraus ergeben, mal nachdenken.
日本でもなんかその右と左
In Japan, there seems to be also the same issue of the issue of left and right. What are the dangers that are lying and lurking in this issue? Perhaps that's something that we should think about. Well, we call it revolution, but at that time, what we considered to be a very important word or element was a dialogue. So dialogue is necessary, I believe, today. In this symposium, I understand that we are reaching one conclusion, that dialogue is indeed essential. So, dialogue as an objective, I believe, is a good objective. Because maybe when we move forward towards more dialogue, we may be able to even move a mountain.
Die Wissenschaft, die Wissenschaftler.
ここでは科学ということについても多く
And we also talked about science and scientists. But from my experience, many scientists are the kind of people that I don't really want to deal with so much.
Stellen von Industrie, von großen Industrien oder der Politik gegen diese Wissenschaftler muss man wirklich aufstehen.
科学者というのはやっぱり市民のために市民と一緒
Scientists, I believe, must act for the sake of citizens, with the citizens, and abide by the citizens. Scientists who are only on the side of corporations, on the side of the authority and power, are not the right kind of scientists.
Würde ich da einen ziemlich großen Raum reservieren.
I am not a religious person. But if there is hell, then I would like these people to go there.
Dass den japanischen Bürgern das Vertrauen abhandengekommen ist und sie dadurch
Dr. Beverstock, in what you just said earlier, you talked about trust or confidence. You said that in the current situation, Japanese citizens are losing confidence that is having psychosocial effects, having health impact. Well, confidence, trust is not something that you can buy. Trust must be earned through actions. Without such actions, trust cannot be earned.
Das Vertrauen verlieren.
だからもし市民が何度でもそういう
So repeatedly, if citizens are repeatedly betrayed by the nuclear industry and the nuclear promoters, it is quite natural consequence that they are losing their trust and confidence
Jetzt nicht näher darauf ein. Wir werden da dranbleiben, also auch von der deutschen Seite und versuchen mit der Zeit diese Kuh vom Eis zu kriegen.
This time now, in this symposium, we have talked many times about 100 millisievert threshold, which is a complete absurd topic, which I don't mean to delve upon. But in a way, it's as if a huge rock is on an iceberg, maybe perhaps on a glacier, and is not moving. We are trying to move this rock. Well, in Germany, we are also working towards removing this huge rock to remove and eliminate the myth of 100 millisievert threshold.
Form leiden.
The question of justice was also discussed. After Fukushima accident, there was a lack of justice. There was an infringement of human rights. People were harmed.
Ich glaube dann, dass Gerechtigkeit und Fairness mit Atomenergie und Atomwaffen nicht zu machen sind.
Justice, fairness, these concepts are in complete opposition with nuclear weapons or nuclear energy, I believe.
広島も長崎もあったし、チェルノブイリもあったし、それで福島第一の事故もあって、皆さんも十分、私はすごく十分経験して。
We had Fukushima, but before that we had Nagasaki, Hiroshima, we had Chernobyl, and these accidents has already occurred. They are not. We can't reverse the situation. Let me talk a bit about next year. If there is a possibility, perhaps for next year.
Und mit Katastrophen, je nach den Informationen, die man zur Verfügung hat, ein bisschen unterschiedlich einschätzt.
Perhaps at the symposium we should talk about the radiation issue. Depending on the level of the existing knowledge of on radiation and radiation protection, the understanding and their perception differs. I think that's something that we faced many times at this symposium as well. Of course, the difference in perception is perhaps coming from different languages. In dialogue, the difference in language is also an issue or perhaps a barrier. Japanese language, of course, but I'm also talking about Chernobyl. Russian was the language that was not spoken by many residents and which caused various issues. For example, for us outsider to understand about the issue that is happening inside Japan, if we wanted to take actions and take part, there is this language barrier which is enormous in front of us. And this does not allow us to do and act as we wish. So next year is the 30th anniversary of the Chernobyl accident, 5 years after Fukushima next year. These two accidents, these two issues, perhaps should be put together as a subject, a topic of the symposium next year to talk about Chernobyl and Fukushima together. How about having the symposium in Germany? But unfortunately, holding this in Germany may be unrealistic. And Ukraine, because Ukraine is in a situation of war near the frontier between Russia and Ukraine, there are many NATO NATO army. So because of that situation, perhaps maybe another alternative is to hold this meeting in Tokyo. Well, always the issue is the issue of interpretation. Well, if you really wanted to hold such symposium or a meeting, if you really strongly wish for this to become a reality, maybe people in Russia, people in Germany, they would be willing to come all the way to Japan to hold and participate in such symposium. And perhaps I believe that may be a good idea. Of course, that also involves budgetary issue. Thank you so much for your attendance and hope you make your way safely home. Thank you very much. Finally, I would like to thank everyone who has participated in this symposium. And finally, the staff members, thank you very much for the wonderful organization supporting us for such fruitful debate. This concludes the 5th Citizen Scientist International Symposium on Radiation Protection. Thank you very much.